Right, Angus, you all set?
Just about.
You know what to do. Clap us in.
We haven't got the clipper.
I know, it's down the stairs. So just
Back to manual clapping.
back to clapping, otherwise it's down to the dungeon to get it.
Welcome to the Whiskey Stories podcast.
I am going for something that doesn't quite exist yet, but I've tried a pre-sample of it. Does that count?
That counts, absolutely.
Right. Something that definitely exists, and we should be proud that it still exists. And then something that I only smelt and licked and didn't get to taste.
Oh, excellent.
Wow.
Sorry, I didn't mean to look you in the eyes.
No, that's quite alright.
No,
I was a bit worried. I was like, oh. Welcome along to the Whiskey Stories podcast with myself, Graham Colgall. We're back in the Athletic Arms, back in Diggers, back where it all began, Angus, over 100 episodes ago, sandwiched nicely between the gents' toilets and the bar.
Absolutely.
In the dugout. How are you, Angus?
I'm very good. Glad to be back. It's been a week or two. So, great.
Yeah.
Aye.
No Chuck, the leak, if you were listening.
He's waiting on a plumber.
The leak in his flat has still not been fixed a week on, so I think it's been cold showers for poor Charles for the last week or so. So all the very best, Chuck.
Chuck's in his flat waiting for a mustachioed man carrying a spanner to come round.
It's nearly 7
I've seen
o'clock.
that film.
it's nearly 7 o'clock, and Chuck's still waiting on a plumber for over a week now. So sorry you're not here, Chuck. Ross is obviously working hard
Employed.
at the Scotch bar, where we got him his job, really.
Yeah.
Started out as a mere barman over 100 episodes ago, and now there he is running the joint. But of course, Angus, as we've always said on this podcast, we definitely need somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to whiskey, and we have no better man for it. We've got, please show your appreciation for the esteemed gentleman, Mr. Arthur Motley. Arthur, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for having me, guys.
No,
You just showed your appreciation. I thought you were going to get me to clap
well,
again.
I was waiting for everyone to burst in around.
It wouldn't have been a very unenthusiastic round of applause with just one person.
Well, look, Arthur, it's great to have you here. Arthur Motley. Now, you are Arthur Motley currently, as we are speaking, of the Motley Spirit Agency. But people listening to this will know you. You've worn many hats in the Scotch Whisky Industry. You've been managing director of the Royal Malt Whiskies was your most recent job there. So welcome along. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I've kind of only really had two hats up to this one. Like, I've only had two proper jobs since I graduated, and one was SMWS, buying whiskey for them, and then I did 21 years at Royal Malt Whiskies.
Wow.
So I've been 25 years in the trade, I suppose, but only two jobs. So this is my third.
Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, I mean, and of course, you've reached the dizzy heights of the Whiskey Stories podcast.
I've made it now.
Not only sandwiched between the gents' toilets and the bar, but you're sandwiched between Graham and Angus tonight. So great for you, eh?
The glamour.
But so I think getting into whiskey, I think that's the best place to start, really, Arthur. What was the journey like for you getting into whiskey? You said 25 years in the industry. Where did it all start?
So I was a student. I came up to live in Scotland, to Edinburgh as a student, the worst kind of student, an English student, and was doing a degree in archaeology. But I had a plan to do something else because I worked out that wasn't a career for me, although it was very interesting, archaeology. And my last year at university, a pal of mine had been working on the bar, actually had been making the sandwiches, I think, at Scotch Malt Whisky Society. And he said that for some reason everyone had got sacked on the bar. Let's not go into that. And they needed people quickly. And I got that bar job, and literally with the intention of learning about whiskey before I left Scotland.
Were you a whiskey drinker before that?
I had tried a few. First was Talisker 10. Second was Loch Dew, the infamous Loch Dew. I liked them both. I'm embarrassed to say that.
So what was the infamous Loch Dew again?
It was.
I feel like I've heard this story before somewhere.
Was it not? Well, wait a minute.
It is now said to be the worst kind of bottling ever. It was Manachmore. I think Diageo basically took the view that people like dark whiskey, and that's absolutely true. People do like dark whiskey, and so they took Manachmore and they put enormous amounts of spirit caramel in it and kind of marketed it as a black whiskey, and it was very black. and it wasn't very good. I now see and know, but at the time I was just like, yeah, I like that too. Anyway, so I tried a few but couldn't really afford it, and so that was the appeal of working at SMWS. So I worked on the bar and just kind of threw myself into it. Thought that would be a cool thing to actually know about. But working over the bar, I just loved the interaction of the members and the way people spoke about whiskey and the history and the culture. And, of course, the taste. I then got to try lots of whiskies in contrast to each other. Unchill filtered whiskey, cask strength whiskey. Went to every single tasting panel I could. And then the week I graduated, someone left in the office and that person did everything. And one of the things this woman did, Kate, was she bought all the whiskey, and the managing director came through, and I was on shift that day, and he'd obviously noticed my enthusiasm and said, do you want a job buying whiskey? And so I became a bulk cask whiskey buyer and organised the panels and did that. And so when he said
unbelievable timing.
I mean,
graduating that week and then fall straight into a job.
I some of my least favourite expressions in life are kind of like it was meant to be, or everything happens for a reason, and all that.
For you won't go by you, Graham.
All that stuff. But I do believe that if something lucky falls on your lap, then just go for it. And that's what I did. And I just thought, wow, sounds like a really interesting thing to do. So I did that, and I got to meet a lot of the old boys of the industry, and as they were. And learn about whiskey, get involved in bulk purchasing, which was its whole different world. It's kind of similar but different now, but it was pretty old fashioned back in those days.
I mean, when are we talking? What time? What year are we talking about this?
I think I started working at the bar in 1999, and I got the proper job 2000.
Right, because we've had a lot of people on the podcast. People you'll definitely know as well, like Mark Davidson. He was again. I don't think everyone had suddenly been sacked from SMWS when he got the opportunity to work behind the bar. But his story was, I think it was a Christmas night out, or there was the staff basically were short of it, and they were like, "Well, Mark, you're usually on one side of the bar, so
you've seen how everything works from that side."
That was it. But the SMWS is a real gateway for so many people, has been for so many people as well, because it's flavour first that you don't know about we're talking about the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, you don't know about what's in the bottles really, you get a number, you get flavour profiles and stuff like that. Did you accelerate yourself? Because you talk about luck, right? And you're sitting there going, now, there's every chance that if you were like, I just need to get a job to get me through uni, you did that, you're working behind the bar, you had a vague knowledge of it, you didn't show too much enthusiasm, the managing director pops his head through and goes, oh Christ, it's Arthur on shift, I'll need to wait till somebody else comes on to ask them. You must have put yourself in a position, like you say, going on tasting panels and things like that. Did whiskey tasting come natural, or did you have to train yourself to do it?
I think it was just instantly fascinating. I was enjoying it. I was, the chat around the tasting table during the tasting panel. I just loved it, and that enthusiasm, makes it easy. It didn't feel like work. I just enjoyed it, and I suppose they recognise that. It's interesting what you say about that SMWS being, like a breeding ground for people who start working in the industry. And I'm not saying it's because of me, but that year 2000 to year 2025 has been utterly extraordinary in the industry. And one thing is, in year 2000, there were not many jobs in whiskey at all. I was extremely lucky. And you hear a lot of these places like SMWS, the Heritage Centre, and I'd add Royal Mile Whiskies to that as well. The people who passed through Royal Mile Whiskies doors, who then went on to do other things, it was a student job or something like that. Ewan Kennedy, for example, I was talking about him with someone. He's making whiskey at Macallan now. He's putting together the cask. He was just, had a student job with us. And there weren't many places where you could get jobs in those days. The very early whiskey festivals, you turned up there and it was all master distillers and master blenders, because there's no such thing as a brand ambassador. One or two.
Well, you mentioned something very interesting when you were working for it. You said the old faces of the whiskey industry, the old characters. Are there any characters in particular that stand out, left an impression on you?
Well, yeah, loads. Too many to mention almost
Right.
because like there's so many cool people and the people were really fun, and that was part of the appeal of it, of how helpful people were to me. When you talk about the old guys, you know, I was turning up at meetings aged 22 talking about negotiating bulk whiskey purchases to some guy who had worked at, you know, 20 distilleries and had been in the industry. But they also kind, also nice. But to illustrate my point, I suppose, they needed staff quickly, and there was a guy who actually left the industry, went into brewing in France. He was a manager, and then the other people on the bar team who also didn't know what they were doing, and we all looked at each other and said, "What are we supposed to be doing?" I don't know. I just started yesterday. It was Mark Watt and Annabel Meikle, who was until recently director of Keepers of the Quake.
Wow.
She had come in from cheese. A cheese merchant or something, and just thought it sounded interesting and liked the sound of whiskey. And Mark had actually come down from Speyside because he wanted to just work other places, and it was clear that he wanted to work in. So, like, there's a core of people who all bumped into each other because there weren't many of us back in those days.
I mean, I'll be perfectly honest. I've said it before. The SMWS at the time for me actually put me off whiskey because I need to be at the time when I was, you know, it was one of those ones, maybe in my mid-20s. I'm showing a little bit of interest in whiskey, so I got given an SMWS membership for my Christmas. Mum and Dad, right? What do we get, Graham? SMWS, like, and I liked the idea of it. I didn't like the. First of all, at that stage for me in whiskey drinking, cask strength whiskey was something I found really, really challenging. Secondly, not knowing the brand made it really, really difficult because I was the whiskey drinker that would go, I know that brand, I trust that brand, I'm going to go and drink that brand. So for me, I found it actually a little bit difficult to get myself into that environment. But for other people like yourself, and there's so many other people that we've talked about, where taking that brand away and just making it flavour first made it so much less intimidating and more enjoyable.
Yeah, I get it. It's a really odd presentation. It's a really odd way of doing things. But I kind of thrived in that environment.
Yeah.
I liked the debranded element of it. I liked the neutrality of, and people would talk about it a bit more, and you'd just cut through big names of distilleries. Occasionally a big excitement, especially as it was getting harder to get some of the big name brands. But, you know, Manic Moore stood next to Macallan and stood next to all the other things. And, you know, that's where I found my love for Kalila, for example, which I might not have done before.
Did that make it a challenge when you were then buying? Because you know what you're buying. You know the brand. So you're instantly, you know, you can be brand led quite easily, where you're sitting there going, oh, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a big, like a Glenfarclas, for example, right? We know Glenfarclas is, what is it? Glenfarclas not one of the first, but yeah. So you're having a meeting with the people at Glenfarclas about buying casks and buying liquid. How easy was it to remain completely neutral when you were going to different distilleries? Because there's other distilleries that a lot of people would look at the branding of it and go, it doesn't stand anywhere near that. You know, there's a hierarchy of distilleries, is what I'm trying to say. And you're buying that whiskey, and people are consuming it at face value. They're not getting to see what it actually is. But you're buying it, so you do know. And did that make it difficult?
No, because I hadn't really had time or couldn't afford to drink the branded whiskey, and I would just go into work and all I'd be drinking is SMWS stuff. So, yeah, you know, I was straight into judging liquids as liquids, I suppose, and I didn't have any brand preconceptions. I mean, I read stuff and I would try a few bits and bobs, but I was still coming out of being a student, and they paid me peanuts as well, so I couldn't afford to drink a lot of the other stuff. But also, I'll correct you slightly there. It didn't work like that, just rocking up at distilleries and being able to buy direct and things like that. It was through brokers and those early days, which people like to mythologize and kind of think about, and the early days of when Pip did it, you know, it already started to move away from that when I was doing my job, and supplies were constricting, and it was harder to get certain Islay whiskies, and the closed distilleries were fading away. Even then, I think about some of the stuff we rejected. It's far better than it was now. You know, you would get, to use Glenfarclas, you know, 5 samples of late 1960s Glenfarclas, and you'd be picky about it.
Yeah.
You'd pick a couple of them. That's hard now. That doesn't happen. Yeah, but already in those days, supplies were starting to restrict, and the future of independent bottling was being questioned. Was it even going to be viable? All those kind of questions were a real concern, and I suspect probably led up to one of the reasons why Glenmorangie and the Glenmorangie SMWS purchase happened, because there was concern about that. I don't know that for sure. I wasn't party to that discussion.
I mean, you wonder, Angus, about the glory days or the golden ages of Scotch whisky.
Yeah.
And you hear Arthur talking, there'll be people, we know people, who are massive whisky enthusiasts, who are desperately keen to forge a path in the whisky industry.
Sure.
And then they'll hear Arthur say that, I was on shift, and suddenly, almost by accident, I became the buyer for SMWS. And people were going, well, I mean,
I mean, that's the miraculous thing, because I mean, I think we've heard stories, particularly from maybe brand ambassadors, so competitive to get these jobs. Hundreds of people applying, people having to put on special presentations, and then sometimes, and it just sometimes being in the right place at the right time. We all know that is some, we've all,
But is it an because I mean, you look at today right now.
Yeah.
I mean, people are saying. I mean, I saw an article this morning actually about White and Mackay talking about their losses. Everyone's books are starting. Over time, all the big guys are releasing their financials for the year before.
Sure.
And you're seeing whiskey is in a difficult situation right now. But is it as bad as people are saying? You'll speak to some people and they'll say, yeah, look, we're probably, and Arthur, you'll maybe know a bit better than we will, but we're probably where pre-COVID numbers were before. People, that's one line of conversation. Through the COVID period, there was a massive inflation of purchases of whiskey, which made the industry look like it was, it was performing really, really well. It was performing really well, not just looking like it. But then, of course, it's come almost not crashing, but it's come back down with a bit of a bang. So is it a time for opportunity? Is it a time where, when things are a little bit trickier, when things aren't in the places they are, you speak to an independent bottler and they'll tell you right now there's never been a better time to buy whiskey, because it's a buyer's market, because all these brands, distillers that have overproduced or maybe have too much stock are now trying to offload it. People aren't buying whiskey over the shops anymore, so they've got casks that they can offload at a much better price.
Well, that's an interesting thing. You mentioned, obviously, that there was this constricting availability of spirit. Do you think now, you might not know firsthand, but do you think there's a reversal of that in some aspects of it, that there's more becoming available online to independent producers?
Yeah, I mean, I do know that is happening. There are stocks being offered up that were not offered before, and name malts being offered that weren't being offered before, and so the independent bottling lists of late this year and more likely early next year are about to get more interesting. So that's good. So that's a healthy
good thing for the consumer in a way.
Yeah, I think there's going to be, we'll know how bad it is. Springtime next year, really. It's we shouldn't be surprised that the thing everyone said was going to happen happened.
Overproduction,
just
demand falling, or a bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, it was more I mean, obviously, I've got a deep interest in looking at the past of Scotch whisky, and what you see before times of turbulence often, and I'm doing a bit of work for a conference I'm presenting at, looking at boom and bust and crash, and this idea that whiskey moves in cycles. I don't really think
repeating.
Well, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. That's an expression I like. And what in at least a few of the times of turbulence that I see, or I have looked at, what you do see before a period of difficulty and distillery closure or mothballing or things like that is overconfidence and
pride going before a fall.
But also that overconfidence comes from a rush of capital in and a rush of money in that might be turned into making stocks and things like that. And if you look at 1898, for example, that's people from the outside investing in whiskey, and we absolutely saw that. Leave the scandal stuff to one side, but even the secondary market and this, like, using the secondary market as a kind of bellwether of how successful whiskey was
Secondary
being
market being like
auctions and things like that, as being a bellwether of success. And wow, aren't we brilliant, because we bought out this thing at 300 quid and now it's selling next week at 500 quid. And that was a false indication of success. And also within that secondary market and that confidence that it gave people to buy more bottles than they needed, you know, that happened really quickly, and ultimately people had more bottles than they needed. So we had this shortage of stock in COVID that produced scarcity. That secondary market loved scarcity. Everyone ploughed in, and by that I mean general consumers as well, and suppliers had the confidence to bring out far too many releases. Some of them pretty ill-conceived, poorly branded. You know, like just no proper, I don't know, a rigor that wasn't there, that was there 15 years ago.
Sure.
And now that's stopped. And if you use that as your metric and you see bottle prices coming down, everyone kind of panic. But look, I mean, I'm still obviously good pals with everyone at Royal Malt Whiskies after I left. And they had a great summer. You know, normal people walking into the shop.
Buying whiskey.
Coming to Scotland. I've heard single malt whiskey's cool. They've got no idea that Macallan X used to be worth $3,000 and now it's only worth $2,000, and, you know, the Noble report and all this type of nonsense. They've got no idea about cask scams. They've got no idea about overproduction. They just want to buy a bottle of whiskey. You know, people are buying whiskey in bars. You know, there's a lot to be positive about as well. And one of the things I would say is, having been here a little while now, is the size and the scale of the whiskey core community who are into whiskey and count it as their hobby and try 30, 40, 50 different whiskies a year. That's huge. You know? Whiskey Fringe, you mentioned before we started, you know, they had to.
Well, you were part of that. So.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get used to saying they now. You know, had to put the price up because our costs have gone up quite significantly, and it sold out quicker than ever. Glasgow Whisky Festival, all tickets are sold out. You know, there's a big whiskey community that wasn't there 10, 15 years ago, and they're annoyed about certain things, and I would say, in many cases, rightly. But they're still there, and I think the opportunity and the challenge for the industry is to slow down a bit, know that their next release is extremely important, put together a really good release which has a really good position and a good story around it that people
and appeals to that market of people. Or
I mean, knowing your market's important. I mean, I think like we spoke last week with Dougal Gordon, and he was talking about. I mentioned it. It was in the Whiskey Stories newsletter a few weeks ago, and it was after episode 100, and it was 5 lessons I've learned from starting a whiskey podcast. And the last lesson was, and I rewrote that paragraph about 100 times, but it was basically, the lesson was, we are the minority, and you find yourself when you sit around the room with people like yourself, Arthur, and other people that we've sat and had drams with and recorded with. It's an echo chamber where everyone just assumes everybody knows the same thing about whiskey. And it isn't until you meet somebody who maybe just likes a dram but doesn't understand the difference between cask strength, single cask, teaspooning, blended malt, blended Scotch, all that kind of stuff. But you think, how could you not know that? Because it's information that's so readily available. But that's information that we've consumed and learned and gone out actively to do that.
Sure.
But as you've said, Arthur, that percentage has probably grown massively in the last 5 years, 10 years. So instead of it where 15, 20 years ago, the whiskey geeks, the people that were buying tickets for Whiskey Fest, even just people that were putting whiskey festivals on, you look at how many whiskey festivals there are now versus what there probably were when you guys started Whiskey Fringe. And when you look at it and you say, the people that were probably going to Whiskey Fringe in the early days were your hardcore, and there still are, I'm not doubting that, but that percentage is probably a lot smaller. We had Paul Main on the podcast from our Hunterland.
Arnaho Hunterland, yeah.
And he said that, you know, he was a whiskey geek in the 90s, and he's like, you were reading about Arran starting up, and you were getting excited because you were reading about it in magazines. There was no social media. You couldn't geek out on whiskey. You could, but you had to really. You were kind of in those tiny little groups of geeks that were getting together and talking about it. Whereas now, like, we've started a podcast. You've got a podcast about whiskey, which we'll talk about. There's whiskey influencers. There's YouTube channels. There's so much information out there now. So that maybe that percentage is still the same. It's maybe only 10% of the whiskey drinker, but the thing is, the volume of that 10% it's 10% of a much bigger number than it was 20 years ago, which suddenly means that there is a market there for people that are still interested in buying whiskey and drinking it.
Yeah, I don't think it's disastrous, but having said that, some distilleries are going to struggle. There's no doubt, and maybe some big companies are going to struggle as well, and there's going to be more bad news, but that doesn't scare me. Like it feels like it's magnifying to the point that it's a disaster. But I quietly speak to some brands; they're doing all right.
Yeah.
They're doing well because they were doing the right thing when all the silliness was happening. That's the kind of pattern that I notice. But yeah, some distilleries are going to close down. A lot of distilleries are going to reduce the amount that they're producing. Some people are going to lose their jobs, and I'm not glib about that. That's absolutely true. But Scotch whisky, I don't think it's lost its shine to the general consumer. I think that core customer is actually kind of waiting and seeing and thinking, well, I've still got all these bottles, and the industry is going to have to work quite hard to make them buy that new thing now. Whereas before, for a while, it was just a mania. New thing come out, everyone was competing against each other, everything would sell out, and maybe the industry got a little bit lazy, just selling things on allocation is the easiest job in the world, and then they didn't have a plan B.
So
and it probably happened. I said that line about we shouldn't be surprised. I think for some people it happened kind of quicker than they expected. They expected it to be like that, but that's the thing. It's looking at the past. These things can happen
very quickly.
And of course
so do you see it more then as a correction rather than a downturn as such? It's more of a kind of, we went too high and now it's coming back to where we should have been, sort of thing, rather than.
Yeah, I hear that word a lot. I talk to a lot of people in the industry, and they kind of, it's a correction, it's not a crash. I don't really know what these words mean, and that's why I'm doing a bit of historical research, kind of trying to just look into it to see those kind of patterns of what it is. But whiskey is still selling, but there was just way too much further down in the line in the supply chain, which also includes the consumer, what was in their houses. And there was just no room for more whiskey for a while, but I do think that'll work its way.
Well, if ever there was a time, we've had George Keeble talked about it at the George and Rachel talked about it on the Fragrant Drops indie bottler spotlight that we did. Just support local is support the wee guys, support independent, support that. There was ever a time that independent whiskey makers, distilleries, bottlers, retailers needed that support. It's probably now, and you look at Royal Mile Whiskies. I do have a question for you, Arthur. As a shop on the Royal Mile when you were there, did you ever think about bringing out, Nessie decanters or anything like that? Did you guys sell that stuff?
No. So if you go, moving on to Royal Mile Whisky. So I joined it, and the business was already had kind of been turned into a modern whiskey specialist. Is how I like to describe it. Of which there was Lochfine Whiskies with a chap called Richard Joynson. Milroy's was a bit older down in London, but a shop that just sold whiskey was actually quite an unusual thing.
So when did Royal Whiskies start? Because I've always remembered it there. It's always been there as long as I can remember.
We had Dougie Liddell on the pod last year. He talked through the story, and I can't remember.
It just reminds.
There was a shop in 1991.
Right.
But that was a shop that sold lots of whiskey, but it also sold Nessie decanters, and there was one with the castle in a decanter.
Well, Angus talked about it on episode 100 because we were asked a question about what whiskey would we use to fight off a bear. That was one of the listener questions. We're quite highbrow at the Whiskey Stories podcast, and Angus suggested a salmon-shaped decanter, which would distract.
It would distract distract the bear into
that's
thinking.
Filled with Spayburn. If you get that joke, I don't know if you know that.
Because that's logo is the
of course, very well done. Right. So first of all, before we do go into Royal Mile Whiskey chat, we have drams in front of us.
One more SMWS question as well.
Well, we have drams in front of us first, Angus.
Do the drams.
What are you dramming?
So I have got first dram, which I've kind of battered through because it's very, very nice actually. I've got a single cask release, above any single cask release, 14-year-old bourbon Really, really nice. Very nice indeed. A part of their, I can't remember what they call it, curious casks or I can't remember, but it's very, very nice. 14-year-old Balvenie.
On brand
In
from
bourbon.
last week's episode with.
Absolutely, yes.
With
Yeah.
Dougal Gordon there. Yeah,
Second, I've got
excellent.
it's from Brave New Spirits, and it is called the Highland Shepherd.
Okay.
So I had to go for this. Kev at the Athletic Arms put it on the story on his social media. Said this will appeal to one particular podcaster. I think he meant me. So yeah,
How you feeling about it? Or have you started?
Yeah, so I think it's from an undisclosed space side. I think. So I don't really know much
The
because
Highland Shepherd.
The Highland Shepherd.
There you go. Okay.
And then lastly, I've got, because you were going mad for 12-year-old whiskies, which I'm sure you'll explain about in a minute.
Yeah.
I've just gone for 12-year-old Bowmore.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Good way of introducing. I've got 3 12-year-old drams in front of me now. It was mentioned on episode 100. I don't think it was a question that we actually got around to asking.
Right.
But it was referenced. Episode number 4 or 6. I'll need to double check. With Cody Reynolds. Cody went through the cycle of a whiskey drinker. And basically, and it was fascinating. And if I had done proper preparation, as we've talked about, it was episode 4. As we talked about, no, it wasn't episode. Anyway, it doesn't matter what episode it was. But it was episode 5, 4 or 6. It was episode 5. But basically, Cody Reynolds, good pal of the pod. He explained something really, really well, and it stuck with me. And it was the journey of the whiskey drinker, right? And it stuck with me because I found myself following it almost to a T. And basically, he talked about the normal whiskey drinker starts drinking cheap blends because that's what they can afford, that's what they can drink. I missed that bit out a little bit. Maybe if you include a night I had on High Commissioner, a half bottle of High Commissioner when I was, I'll say for the purpose of the pod, of legal drinking age. But anyway, I would say that was probably there. You talked about a grouse on episode number 1.
I did, yes.
Drinking a famous grouse on the way up the train as a student. You were looking for something to get you where you needed to be.
Exactly.
Not that that's what grouse's purpose is, of course. But anyway, he said you start there, and then what you do is you move into the sort of core range. And he said normally you're looking for a big flavour profile that grabs you, right? And it's either sherry or peat. Okay, you went down the peated route. I went down the sherry route. Hence the reason it became the sherry tart. And he did say, as a caveat to this, that people stick in this cycle. You don't always get through it, but what you do is some people will just find their spot and they'll stick to it. Then you need something a bit more, and then you go into the cask strength stuff, right? Cask strength stuff. Then you start experimenting with a single cask kind of thing, and then that's when you really open up your flavour profile. And then what tends to happen, and this is where I am at the moment, in between two things. Then you go around and you suddenly re-explore bourbon casks because, and he explained it really, really well, that your flavour, your palate has developed. So previously, when you were at the sherry or the peat side of things, your palate just needed something with a bit of something big. Whereas once you've developed that palate, gone through it, you suddenly appreciate a little bit more of the nuances that come with first fill, second fill bourbon cask whiskey. And I would definitely agree with that right now. I've gone off the sherry and I'm 100% on the bourbon side of things. I really do appreciate a bourbon cask. Then he said, then what happens is you end up going back to the core and appreciating the blends. And one of the things I'm now at is, I think we've been spoilt on this podcast, Angus. We've had a lot of very, very good whiskey that people have treated us to. But at the same time, I think it's really, really good to go back to... I've always been jealous of people. We've had people on the podcast maybe a year ago who said...
If I hadn't just finished it, I would have offered you some of this Balvenie bourbon.
But I would say that we had I can't remember who we had on the podcast a year ago, and they said it was actually at Whiskey Fringe. They said they went to Whiskey Fringe, they didn't know what they wanted to do, so they just wanted to go back to all the core releases. Instead of going down the stairs and trying all the fancy new stuff or seeing what new distillers are bringing out that's new, they just said, I just want to align myself back with what's the core releases like and what does a Glenfiddich 12 like. So I've put it on the Facebook group this week. We were asking about I'm wanting to find the best 12-year-old core release whiskey. Okay, we're looking for a top 10, right? And that's what I'm wanting to try and find. And I'd be interested to speak to yourself about that, Arthur. So I've got a Glenfiddich 12, albeit it's an old Glenfiddich 12.
Yes, so it's kind of 90s bottling or an 80s
early
bottling.
2000s or late 90s bottling. I don't think it's got pure malt on it, so I think it is still Glenfiddich single malt.
Yeah.
So if it was pure malt, it would probably age it.
Yeah, I think there's
single malt. So it's single malt, so that would be what, 2000s after? You reckon? Yeah. But it still looks nice and old, the bottle. I've got a Dalmore 12.
Yeah.
And I've also got an Oban 12. Natural cask strength, however, from ex-bourbon and refill casks. And that's one in front of us, Arthur.
Not really the core release.
No.
More of a...
But annoyingly, it's the one I prefer so far. But
there you go.
I'm going to have to discount that. So if I was going at the two of them, I'm going to stick with the Glenfiddich 12 at the moment.
Can I go back on your point there slightly? Who did you say? Cody?
Cody Reynolds.
Who's he work for again?
So he's
Tom
Angus
Towell,
Dundee.
Glen Cadam.
Oh, yeah, I know the fella, I think that starting on a blend thing is becoming a lot less relevant now.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people go straight into the single malt. That might change as well. Whiskey's not going up in price, but people's disposable income has gone down, and I think it's going to be a bit more focus on blends and blended malts. But having said that, if we talk about recent history, I think more people are going straight in and malt, and I think that sherry peat thing is because part of the joy of getting into single malt is noticing the differences and navigating your way around something that's pretty bewildering. And so it's the first things you're able to spot the differences and define your own opinion. So you spot something heavily sherried. Yeah, I get that. I can understand that flavour because it's so big and bold. Same with peat, and you can make your choice. Hopefully you like both. And then you can start to look into spirit character a bit more. But it's reassuring. It's like your first, I don't know, like you're playing in a football team and you score your first goal. That's your first goal. You can tell the difference between sherry cask whiskey and peated whiskey, and you're not one of those people that say, I don't like whiskey, it all just tastes like whiskey.
Correct, yeah.
And so that's your easy access navigation point. Then people work off from there. But yeah, I'm not... And my experiences of like that can be a general rule, but it's definitely one of those general rules that's broken.
Absolutely.
And it reminds me of the old way that I was kind of told how it worked and how it was often presented in SMWS tastings. They did a lot of corporate tastings for people who are trying whiskey for the first time, and you'd often hear things people like saying, "Oh, that You probably won't like, if you're just getting into whiskey, you probably won't like this peated stuff yet."
Which is kind of the wrong thing to say, isn't it?
It was the wrong thing to say.
Because we've had just by the by, we've had first-hand experience of people coming on saying, the first whiskey I ever tried was a Lagavulin 16. I thought it was amazing, and that got me into whiskey.
Yeah, it tastes different to anything else in the world. It's amazing stuff. But it was that old-fashioned journey of whiskey thing that I'm slightly sceptical of, and I don't think people work like that. The other thing they used to say as well, that there was no hope that women would like that peaty whiskey, and
We've had more women on our what 3 drams, which I do keep a note, and I do keep promising that one day I'll sit down and write everyone's what 3 drams out on the blog. I would comfortably lay my hat that more female guests on this podcast have referenced peated whiskey as a what 3 dram than men.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Why should a flavour style have a gender attached to it? But I would notice that, and they expressly said that this whiskey wasn't for them. But you would notice that people and women, they'd suddenly pick up this last dram and go, wow, what is that? And some people would be freaked out by it, but some people would be absolutely captivated by it. So I think I have a hesitancy to plot people or try and shovel people into particular areas, because there's such a breadth of style. It's perfectly valid to like one style and not the other, and you definitely shouldn't say that this is the order to do it in.
No, you're right, and I would say that, going back to my earlier point about the SMWS, is my personal journey of it was, like I say, cask strength whiskey, because this is the thing about the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, is the fact that it's an entry point for a lot of people, but at the same time, it's probably like from my experience, it was a stumbling block, because I just could not drink cask strength whiskey.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand it, and now I do. I totally understand it. It's like, I get it. And what I would say, like, why would anyone think that a 56+% whiskey was palatable? Because all your like that side of it. Why would you not just drink a 40 to 43%, which is completely manageable? You don't need to add ice, you don't need to add water, you can drink it yourself and what have you. But again, preconceptions maybe was that wrongly I probably thought through some information I was given is that adding ice and water to your whiskey was the wrong way of drinking it, which meant that single cask whiskey being drank neat was just almost an impossible hurdle to get over. But anyway,
you're 12-year-olds. You're 12-year-olds.
Yeah, I want to ask one last thing about SMWS. You mentioned it as a buyer, and I was just interested. You mentioned that going up to Glenfarclas, let's say, and shaking hands on a deal didn't really happen. So were you more like the because we've spoken to a lot of independent bottler or indie bottlers, and they would talk about this process of parcels of whiskey. Obviously, we've spoken to independent bottlers who are laying down
fillings,
laying down their own, lay down their own fillings. Is that something SMWS did? How did it change from when you started to how you finished? And were there any deals? I mean, were there any whiskey you bought directly from distillers, and did that change over the years as well?
There were a few. I was only 3 years or so, maybe 4, that I was doing the buying there. So it's a relatively short tranche of time. But there was. The whiskey that we were buying direct tended actually to be fillings, as they were trying to secure that future.
New make spirit, laying it in your own casks or
combination. Actually, our own casks on the whole. In fact, I think weirdly in that box there might be a picture of me filling up some casks for SMWS when we go into the box.
I'll take some pictures for the Facebook group.
But yeah, it's a combination. But everyone, like the members, wanted to think there was this direct relationship. But that's just not how the structure of the industry works. The structure of the industry is unusual, really interesting to me, and the historical reasons why it exists are really interesting. But on the whole, it was through a neutral third party for very good reasons. And the trick was just to be able to get casks that you could sample and get stuff that was good, because there was no issue with the pricing
at the time at all,
or no, we would insist on samples, but that was becoming more and more difficult.
But as the buying power that the SMWS, I mean, we're talking maybe early 2000s. We're talking here what time? Yeah. So was it as big as it is now? The buying power, because we'll talk about with Royal Malt Whiskies, if you hold the power of what you can buy, the volume that you can buy, you obviously can. We mentioned about the industry changing as a buyer's market. We had indie bottlers on here a year ago saying that they get offered a parcel of casks and you say buy as is, and it's whatever, you don't get a chance to sample them. The casks might be empty by the time they arrive, or they might be completely dud, whatever, but you don't get a chance. That's changing slightly from some of the people that we've heard, but did you have that already, that buying power from as an independent bottler, an established one?
SMWS then had no buying power. I mean, that's
it's only since maybe the change of ownership that changed, I take it.
Well, and going well, kind of 2 changes of ownerships, if not 3, I think, depending on how you look at it. But no, I mean, the SMWS then, and to a certain degree now, is tiny compared to the scales at which the industry was used to operating. Really? It was buying 5 casks of old Glenfarclas is not a big deal to these guys. I mean, it wasn't then, and plus the prices were so low.
But yeah, it's fascinating. Like in any other industry, and you're a fresh-faced young lad in their early 20s, suddenly thrust into having a chat with these brokers. There's a world in any other industry. There's a world where someone sees you coming a mile away and goes, "We're gonna, here's this young guy that doesn't have a Scooby about being in the industry. He's not cut his teeth yet." But you were saying that actually the industry was supportive of you and very helpful and friendly, and
and it worked to standards that were very decent. And actually, the other thing that I think stood in my favour was I was so young, and young people were not drinking whiskey at all.
So there was an element of...
Yeah, they were like, that's great, this young lad is really into whiskey. This is exactly what the whiskey industry needs. Because at that time, there was a concern that young people would ever drink whiskey. And whiskey's success and single malt whiskey's success was not assured. And the boom that happened afterwards, really triggered by the internet, I would say, was not predicted. You know, they were really worried that young people would get into whiskey at all.
We've always said, Angus, the internet is always going to be a big thing.
I've always said it was going to be big.
We always said that. Yeah. But, Royal Malt Whiskies then, making the move. How did the opportunity come around, and what was it like walking into Royal Malt Whiskies then? Because you said, 21 years at Royal Malt Whiskies?
Yeah.
So 21 years ago, Royal Malt Whiskies didn't look like they look like now.
No, but it was a really... so I mentioned 1991. I think it was 1997 when a guy called Keir took it over. He'd worked at Signatory, and he actually started an independent bottler called Dormant Distillery Company, which is the name of the business that it trades under, the Royal Malt Whiskies trades under. But it was run by relatively young guys, and it was really forward thinking, trying to be a modern whiskey specialist. I think it was the second whiskey company to sell online, to retail online, and Whiskey Fringe, I think, was the second whiskey festival in the UK. There'd been 1 year of Whiskey Live, and so it was doing things like, it was being innovative, and it was being creative and doing things that were really, really good. So it was well supported by the industry for that reason. And the funny thing was, actually, almost as soon as we switched on the internet, I was talking about this with Ross the other day, actually, at Balmoral. As soon as we switched off the internet, on the internet, guys from Japan, like bars from Japan, would be buying like 1960s Bowmore, and people in Germany would be buying old sherry cask whiskey. We knew already where certain types of whiskey would go, and Sweden was a bit more mixed.
So this is a market you were opening up to people that didn't have the possibility of buying certain bottles before. Now online, there you go. You can click a button and you can order a bottle. You'd have probably had to have spoken to hundreds of people before you'd be able to get access to it before.
Yeah, well, like, route to market is boring, but it's important.
Yeah.
And logistics is boring but important, and that's maybe one of the reasons the big industry was hesitant to really embrace single malt. I mean, they did, but it was kind of pulled out of them as much as pushed out of them, with exceptions. There were some companies who did a great job, Diageo, for example. But like logistics and route to market abhors small batch things, and that is single malt by nature. But somehow these silos of appreciation had built up around the world. Yeah. Suddenly the internet exists, and immediately, and those silos already had particular tastes.
Yeah,
I found that quite interesting in retrospect, looking back at it.
Really, like in terms of the silos being regional silos, where you would know that people in that country or district prefer this particular flavour profile.
It would be as specific as we're going to get. We've got access to some 1960s Bowmore bottled by Duncan Taylor. I think, we'll buy 3 cases. Japan will buy them all, and then we'll put it online. And sure enough, like 3 or 4 customers from Japan. So they had already decided that amazing tropical pineapple-y Bowmore style was their thing. It's interesting, and how they got to that point, I don't know.
How did they find? Because you're seeing that. I've seen that in India. I was speaking to somebody over in India last week, and we were talking about. They were saying that Karnataka State in Bangalore, particularly, is one of the fastest growing states for peated whiskey, smoky whiskey flavour profile, is now entering that market, and it's actually accelerating. So suddenly you're looking at it going, we're selling the most peated whiskey at the moment, smoky whiskey, it's Karnataka State, it's Bangalore. Why? I don't know why. I don't know what's causing it. But ultimately, from a retail point of view or from a distributor's point of view, like what you've just said, you can suddenly go, right, well, we've got somebody we know that will buy a lot of this type of whiskey because it's selling very, very well. But it's fascinating to know what causes that. Why is that there? And you're talking about online retail with Royal Malt Whiskies starting out on the internet and what have you. But what about the trade side of things then? Because was Royal Malt Whiskies at that point distributing whiskey to the sort of end consumer through the shop and the online retail, but also to the trade, or was that something that was sort of started up and born out of luck or chance, or just out of a plan?
Luck or chance. Well, it was a bit of luck or just noticing an opportunity for success. And actually, without seem arrogant, that I drove that. That was my thing. Yeah. And it started because I took control of a van to save petrol money, and and thought I could start delivering and developing a few accounts and drop them off on my way in and way out of town. So I started doing that, and I got a few accounts early doors, and then gradually I realised that actually there was an opportunity because traditional distribution, again, didn't like all these products. We had all these products anyway, and it was just
this is your classic example of going into a hotel and it's the same 5 bottles of whiskey. You know, at a certain point you would say, right, I know they're going to have A, B, C, and D, and that's what they had. Whereas you have that range of.
Yeah, and the bigger wholesalers, they didn't want to deal with all these. They didn't think they needed
Much easier to deal with 2 or 3 people than deal with so many.
Yeah, they didn't need 100 single malts or 200 single malts, but we had them anyway, and we spoke the same language as these whiskey bars or restaurants or whatever it was. It did really well. It's a hugely important to the business now, part of the business. I will say I kind of started it, but then there's many great other people that have.
Sure. What's the perfect? I was speaking to somebody who works in the industry, will remain nameless, and they said the perfect distributor of whiskey does not exist at the moment. Right? Now, what they said was there's...
Feel free to disagree.
Well, no, they said there's a distributor and they mentioned Royal Malt Whiskies. They said that there's a distributor like Royal Malt Whiskies where you can put an order in and it'll be sorted out, dispatched and delivered in a very quick and efficient time frame. You know, and that probably goes back to, as you say, you stick it in the van and being able to drive it and drop it off. Am I right in saying that for certain clients at the time, before when you were working for Royal Malt Whiskies, any particular bar within reach could have a bottle if they desperately needed it within the same day, or definitely within 24 hours of putting an order in, depending on the volume?
Yeah, if they say they'd screwed up or they had an emergency, we would do that. But it got logistics.
Of course,
it gets bigger that you need to organise.
Absolutely.
Yourself,
I mean, if someone up in the if the Highlander Inn suddenly said, "Can you get us a bottle of this tomorrow?" It would have been a difficult one to do. But obviously, locally, it might have been easier. But then they also said there's another side of it where maybe everyone's squeezing margin. Everyone's looking for the best margin in that market so that they can work out their profits, etc., and make money on it. And everyone has to make a cut on it. And the problem you have with distribution model is the fact that you have the distillery or the producer of the whiskey or the bottler of the whiskey has to get their share, the distributor has to get their share, and then the person at the end, if they're in the trade, has to also get their share. So your problem with that is everyone's sharing the pie 3 ways effectively, which means that there's a way of saying, well, if you want to go with the person that's going to give you the best margin, you're going to get the best margin, but you're going to have to pay on the fact that you're not going to get the delivery value. You're not going to get the within a day or two. You're not going to get your order. You're maybe going to have to fill out forms, go through processes, what have you. If you're going through, but if you want to get it the next day or you want to get it within a few days, you're going to have to lose out on the price of what you're ordering, because you're not going to get as big a margin on the value, but you get in return you get that standard of delivery.
Yeah, it's a bit more like going to pricing chains and structures, a bit more complicated than that. But I mean, the biggest thing that we did really well is offering a really broad range of products which people wanted, and they wanted independent bottlers, and they wanted limited editions, and they wanted all those type of things. And we delivered them really well and did a good job. So it's a
how
good
do you
thing I'm
convert a
proud
bar?
of.
Like Angus was saying, there's so many times you walk it like as becoming what I would self-profess snobby whiskey drinker to where you sometimes maybe go to a pub or a bar, and the first thing you look at is I don't drink an awful lot of beer or lager or anything like that. So a couple of Guinnesses and then on to the whiskey is probably my sort of usual routine. So if I go to a bar or a pub, the first thing I'm sort of doing when I'm walking in is you look at the back bar, you look at the shelf, and if you go into one of these places where you'll see a Lafroig 10, a Glenfiddich 12, a Bowmore 12, or the very
Maybe
core,
five bottles.
five bottles, Johnny Walker Black Label. Not that there's anything wrong with those drams, but surely to gain the accounts, did you ever have to? Is there any examples of conversion over to? You've maybe met somebody that's gone, oh, we would like to buy some whiskey off you, and you've been able to open that back bar right up by being able to say, look at what we can offer you.
Yeah, very often, because very often the people working behind the bar don't want to be serving just the big five. Often the obstacle is the people that own the organisation. And if you look at a very big group, then they want to get volume through predictable type things and possibly be rewarded because those big brands will invest in that bar in other ways to say stock our stuff.
Like what Matt's beer mat or your point of sale stuff and things like that.
Yeah, and cash.
Cash,
know.
yeah, right. Yeah, of course,
I'm not saying that it's like dodgy.
No, we know what happens. If people say like, sponsor our beer garden and you'll get $5 or $6 grand and we'll give you all your tables and chairs or your canopies, etc.
But the level who actually work on the bar, more often than not, they're interested and want to get those things in. So yeah, loads, absolutely loads, and we became a very good specialist wholesaler of spirits.
Because the interesting thing I find about
not just whiskey, by the way.
No, of course.
Things,
the interesting thing I find about distributors and wholesalers like yourselves is that you're in that funny position where you're number one being sold to, and then secondly selling on as well. Mm-hmm. So, it's not as straightforward as naively I thought maybe a few years ago that Royal Malt Whisky just stock everybody that does whiskey, because why wouldn't you? But actually there's a lot of people who have probably sent you lots and lots of samples of whiskey and said, come on Arthur, we're a new distillery, or we're a distillery, we've got this release, or we're a bottler, or we're a blender, here's our release, buy 100 cases off us and you'll be able to sell it at this. And you'll have had to say no more times than you've said yes, probably.
Well, actually, it's an interesting development over time, over 21 years, which is, and my first job was as buying within the business. I did that for quite a long time and then became purchasing director, sales and purchasing director, I think it was. But in the early days, any new distillery, including gin distilleries and things like that, we would hunt them out and would say, we absolutely want to support your project. So brave you, start a distillery. We really want you to succeed. Really, really enthusiastic. And then it just came to the point that there were too many products, too many distilleries. So that had to change. But at the beginning, we were able to stock absolutely everyone, including foreign whiskey like McMira. When that first came out, we did a huge amount of McMira because it was genuinely exciting and challenging to have malt made over there. But at that, those days are past now. There's just way too many products and there are too many producers. Therefore, some will have to shut down and some people lose their jobs.
Yeah, and as Motley, so the Motley Spirit Agency then, sales strategy, branding, research, presenting, coaching and storytelling. So I suppose there's a bit of gamekeeper turned poacher, or poacher turned gamekeeper scenario here, because if I'm a brand, because this is the thing, the Royal Malt Whiskies are a big organisation with servicing. I mean, how many accounts was it that were trade accounts did you guys have by the time you'd left there?
400.
Yeah, and that's UK wide, not just Scotland, or is that Scotland and UK?
Heavily focused in Scotland.
Yeah. So suddenly it would be easy for me to naively think, well, listen, if I just bottle 200 bottles of a hogshead that I've got, I'll just phone Arthur and get Royal Malt Whiskies to take it and sell it for me. But the problem you've got is that, number one, you'll say to me, what would the first process be like? If I suddenly said to you, right, Arthur, I've got 200 bottles of single cask whiskey from a refill hogshead cask that I've bottled under our brand, Whiskey Stories Podcast 3. Buy it off me at this per bottle, and you can go wild with it. Sell it to your consumers on the trade, your consumers through the shop, and why wouldn't they? Because it's bloody good whiskey.
Yeah, I've heard that pitch before.
I'll give you a sample free of charge. Come on,
yeah, it's a guy called Sam who runs the buying team now, and a sample of whiskey, his desk is a disgrace for all for all the samples he's got on his desk. I suppose you brought up the business I'm doing now. So one of the areas of consultancy that I'm doing is about consulting on route to market, and route to market into retail and route to market into on trade, because it's going to get more and more difficult.
Yeah.
And knowing how to pitch and knowing to produce that, you either need proven demand, or you need to make sure that product is needed with not just Royal Malt Whiskies, but any retailer. And I think I picked up a few things because I've been pitched to by pretty much everyone in the industry now and seen all the different ways of doing it. And it's going to get more difficult. And I'm not going to tell you my secrets because people have to pay for them now.
No, of course. And what we'll do is we'll put the next half hour behind the paywall.
Yeah, there you go.
But I know, because it is interesting. Like, everyone will think their whiskey is the best whiskey that they've ever tasted, and then they'll say to you, "Well, why wouldn't you?" If I'm a new bottler, I'll just say to you, "Arthur, come on, why wouldn't you?" Now, is it a case of, in these situations, are you able to, with being the size of what Royal Malt Whiskies were you able to sort of just squeeze the margin and go, well, if you want us to take your whiskey at this, we've tried it, it's good whiskey, we think we could probably sell it, but at the same time, you can then suddenly go, this is the margin that we're going to start with, and once we build because there will be legacy relationships that Royal Malt Whiskey had you had built up, where you can suddenly go, well, first of all, we know that if we take this consignment off you, it's going to sell anyway. So we know that we're going to sell it, and we don't have to be pernickety about how much money we need to make. We know we're going to sell it. It looks good for us to be dealing with a whiskey of this calibre, this size, etc., etc. Whereas when it's a new guy entering the market for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, margin's important, sure, but it's the confidence that somebody's going to sell is the most important thing now, and in a cluttered market, and it was never that much about negotiation on price and margin. Sure, it was a thing, but it's more about working together to get successful products. And it's funny, actually, moving to the other side of the fence. I mean, I'm not talking to retailers to talk about how Royal Malt Whiskies does things. I'm talking to brands about how to sell into retail in general. And it's funny going to the consultancy position. At times I thought, well, why am I going to tell these brands? Like, am I really able to give enough insight for them to pay me? But the first couple of meetings, straight away you're like, oh no, don't do that. And it's hard because, and it was hard for Royal Malt Whiskies, increasingly so, because these meetings, you're coming in with people, and it was their heart and soul, and they had invested millions in a distillery, and they did obviously think it's good. They do obviously think it's good, but we're dealing with all these great products, in the warehouse, in the shop, and all
crowded
that.
market.
Yeah, exactly, and actually getting that thing now that's going to be really successful, it is harder than ever, and you've got to be really, really sharp about it. And I've found strong opinions have been really, really easy to express of the first clients I've been talking to. So it's funny. You do build up this knowledge or this instinct over time.
But it's interesting. Well,
give one before. Right, I want you to. I'm going to put you on the spot, and I know that you're saying that. I can't give away my secrets because people have to pay. But if someone is watching this, hearing you and going, right, okay, give one mistake, one very easy, one common mistake that you've seen that so many people fall into when they're trying to launch a brand or get a route to market. That people often fall into that mistake trap that you've seen. That is an easy fix straight away.
It wasn't always a mistake. And it was for a while successful and real, but selling something on the basis that it's scarce when it's not scarce, and that they're lucky to have me, you're lucky to have my product. That was actually really successful for because whiskey was scarce and things were selling out quickly. But now that don't work anymore. With very, very few any exceptions, one or two brands in the world maybe. Van Winkle, that doesn't count. Yeah, so who else are we talking? Even Springbank's relatively available now. So those days are past. It's back to the days when people had to work to sell whiskey, And that's when I started in the industry, and that was the first 10 years of when I was in the industry. And it's been a full decade now of people not having to work to sell whiskey.
Yeah.
And by work, I don't mean charm. That's the other thing. Oof. When when someone in sales gives themselves too much credit, like, I'm so charming, I will say the right things, and that will magically make them buy something, and that is sometimes might work.
Yeah.
But if you're working with a commercial buyer, I would say that will very, very, really rarely work, and it's not about the person selling in the room. It's about whole sales strategy. It's about the marketing position. It's everything, as well as the flavour. You have to have a product that the buyer wants now.
And that's
You can't do it with charm.
Is that, well, first of all, Stuart Baxter, I'm sure it was Stuart Baxter, Barley Baxter, who was on here, and he said the biggest lesson he learned becoming a brand ambassador is this: put the whiskey first. It's not about you as the brand ambassador. It's very easy. Brand ambassadors have to have that charismatic character, stand in front of rooms of people and give them the story and the patter and the
They're a cocky bunch.
yeah. But at the same time,
I love them.
the product that you're selling, the product that you're giving people is the centerpiece of the show.
Yeah, and don't lose sight of that.
Yeah,
as well.
don't lose sight of that.
But
But what's very interesting now with the challenges that the whiskey industry is facing and where we are at the moment and things like that, and it's like what you just said, is I think it took you two sort of other examples or two points before you got to flavour. Okay, liquid to lips is what everyone talks about. Yeah, you
but
know,
I think
can we get liquid to lips? Can we get people drinking our whiskey so people can appreciate and realise that actually it's good? But actually,
There's loads of good whiskey.
well,
but how much is the marketing part of that over? Like, you speak to someone in production and they'll tell you, like, no, we use this fermentation and we do this distillation style, we use these cask and we buy the best wood and we do this and we do that. The next thing. Then the brand ambassador will say, or the people in charge of the BDMs will say, get liquid to lips, because once people try our whiskey, then people do it. But then at the same time, then it's like, well, wait a minute, does marketing become more important? Because if people see your brand, people are more inclined to try your brand. Once they've tried your brand, people are more inclined to suddenly go, and then you get your opportunity to tell the story of, here's our fermentation process, here's our distillation process, this is our maturation process.
Yeah, but those are technical specifications. Like, I'm a whiskey fan. Like, I don't want to make it too neutral, but those are technical specifications, and the product. Yes, it's the flavour. Yes, it's the packaging. But I suppose a lot of people think marketing is social media or adverts or things like that. Marketing is also price positioning, the channels that it goes through, who you're trying to appeal to, what that messaging is. It's more than just fluffy, fancy pictures. And those are the nuts and bolts that need to be really, really right. And also, I suppose the other thing is that the lifespan of a product is increasing, because they're not going to sell out immediately unless you're going to do a limited run of 100 bottles, but that's not going to make the company any money.
Yeah.
So the life, and even if you did do a limited run of 100 bottles, it still might not sell out. You've got to create a product that is good enough to exist on a shelf for months and months and months and months now. And part of the flabby, part of the flabby way of doing business was, well, put this out, sell out, and then we'll put something else out and sell out and put out,
keep just
That's all changed now. So yeah, absolutely. The product, the liquid, we can slow down. We can also be over-aging stock a bit now because it's not so valuable. That scarcity is gone, and we can actually slow down a bit rather than that era where it was, we need another 10,000 bottles and we need them by October. That was the kind of,
That's what it was, yeah.
You just felt this urgency of product creation and NPD. So it's really, the NPD, the new whiskies, they've got to nail them. And they've got to be really well thought through in their entirety. Because the whiskey that's been released hasn't been, with some exceptions, it's not been awful. But
we've spoken about it. It's because it's all regulated in the same way. It's quite hard to make bad. It's quite hard not to make a good product in some regards. It's all made the same way. It's all the same product to the same specifications.
I think what Arthur's saying, Angus, is
it comes down to You go ahead, Graham.
I think what Arthur's saying is for our next release, we'll just create a ballot. Right, and if you ballot it, if you say we've had to put this to ballot,
we'll just release 10 bottles.
Yeah, we put it to ballot, then everyone will just see that. Oh yeah, there's so much demand for the next Whiskey Stories podcast release. ... That they've had to ballot it to make sure that because it's just so heavily sought after.
Absolutely, Graham. Yeah.
Arthur, you mentioned your love for history and things like that as well. So looking back, you're also, I think Angus and Angus mentioned it before we started recording. This is one of the first crossover podcast collabs because you're part of Liquid Antiquarian.
Close.
Right.
Nearly.
Have another go. You did mention you're dyslexic.
YouTube, the Liquid Antiquarian. Aquarian, that's it. You could have made it an easier spelling for
the Whiskey Aquarium.
The Whiskey Aquarium. Right, Antiquarium, right.
Don't worry, my wife still calls it Liquid Antiquarian.
Antiquarium, really? Yeah. So what is that?
So, it's an odd shift from really commercial chat to this, but that is my life actually. So, and it has been for a long time. So, I've always been interested in the past and would read a lot. I read a lot, and over time, I've good pals with Dave Broom. Right from the start, again, there weren't that many people working in whiskey. You bumped into these people, and over time, I would kind of go up to him and said, like, have you read the Excise Act, for example, 1823? And it'd be like, I don't think he had at that stage, actually. and I said, I've read it, and it's really different to the actual books, the whiskey books, including some of Dave's. And I was doing more and more of this, and then COVID came along. We all started doing the StreamYard tastings, the live tastings. And I said to Dave, because he'd stopped traveling, as he does a lot in his normal day-to-day life, this would be a really interesting format that we could discuss and put on slides of the actual original documents. So we tried this in lockdown, and so the Liquid Antiquarian is a channel that looks at the past history of booze, not just whiskey. So we've done rum and we've done champagne, and we have 90% of our content is actually whiskey, but the idea is that we can do any drinks, and we try and start with primary evidence. So we're not doing the secondary text everyone's read that can be quite samey.
You're going back to source.
It's all, a lot of that secondary text is based on the same stuff.
Yeah.
And in my opinion and Dave's opinion, and actually an increasing number of people's opinion, that is now out of date, and we now have more information.
Yeah.
So we started doing that, and I suppose the other thing that characterises it is we try and look at quite a broad thematic approach to it, and that we're not just looking at a brand. We're trying to look at how whiskey is influenced by rum politically and economically, which is a really big area. Or
and
technically,
brandy as well is a huge.
All these things are linked, but a lot of the histories they either zoom in just on a brand. Which leaves out an extraordinary amount of amazing stories of distilleries that don't even exist anymore. And it also is so narrow, like they talk about the 1800s and don't mention the Highland clearances. Don't mention the Napoleonic Wars, or don't mention the abolition of slavery and the fact that the slavers got a huge compensation, started investing that in lobbying government, and then when the Napoleonic Wars happened, the government banned the use of grain, so the ex-slavers said, well, let's just distill using molasses. So a lot of whiskey, or distilleries that were previously distilling whiskey, were then forced to use molasses. And then when they went back onto grain, those sugar plantation owners were still saying, make this legal, put molasses into the wash. And people tried that. And I suppose...
So a kind of 50-50 whiskey and rum sort of thing.
Kind of.
Rumsky.
Yeah, rumsky.
Yeah.
So, like, there's loads of really interesting big stories. There's loads of really interesting small stories that just haven't been told. So we do that through Liquid Antiquarian. It's pretty niche, I admit, but it's amazing. It's found its audience, and people are now supporting us on Patreon, which is great. And
talk us through that. We'd love to know how. Go on, please explain to us how you can monetize this. That's fantastic. If there's anyone listening that's thinking, fuck, Graham's just heard the word Patreon and he's going to start charging us to listen. How does that work?
Well, it's easy to set up. It's just whether or not people are actually
willing to open their
I
wallets.
don't know if we've got paid for content feature yet, I guess. But I mean, Ross, I apologise, and I don't apologise to our guests who come on, where I do say I try and find. I'm not being I am deliberately ignorant to try and not find out as much as possible.
That's fine.
So we do have conversation. It's natural. Ross did message me because he's not here tonight, and Ross always likes to, as people, listeners of the podcast, particularly Scott Moore and his current wife, who happily shout at their their radio or their
shut up, Ross.
Shut up, Ross. Ross did say a couple of things to mention tonight. Whiskey myths was one of them.
Okay.
Right. Talk about whiskey myths. What are we talking here? If you're going through some of the history, and you'll see myths that have appeared in whiskey that people will see as, once it gets passed down and passed down and passed down. What are the sort of bigger ones that you've
because this is really interesting. You're going back to the primary sources. You're not regurgitating the lines that maybe kind of almost Chinese whispers. It's no new history, just new historians, sort of thing. Because the whiskey myths must perpetuate at some point and carry on down.
I mean, I would say the story of whiskey is mythologized. I think we all know it in our heart that we love the drink and we love Scotland. It's my home, has been for a long time now, and we're happy to hear these stories about the past that kind of fit with what we want to think about whiskey. And the industry has told those stories, and to be fair, they kind of told them based on books and amazing research done by people who didn't have the internet, which has opened up a huge amount of other areas.
Sure.
But a lot of it was done by people who worked for whiskey companies, and some of that needs to be unpicked. I suppose whiskey myths, starting from the start point, it is all a myth. It is a story that we tell ourselves, and we kind of know it. And some of it's true, and some of it's not true, as is the case with all myths. But I suppose the first thing I would say is that the whiskey industry is not that old. We say it is far older than it is, and then most BA's presentation, not most, but a lot of them will start talking about invention of distillation in the Arab world, and then something to do with the Irish, and something to do with monks, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like the whiskey industry as such really started in 1823 with the Excise Act. That's 200 years ago. That's recent. Once you start looking at the broader picture, it was effectively an immature spirit that was drunk unaged.
Yeah.
Dave and I have actually pushed back the first evidence for conscious aging to quite a bit further back, 1742, but it was rarely done.
It wasn't, and if it was done, it wasn't necessarily deliberate, like you're saying, unconscious aging.
That's another myth.
No.
There were people saying that aged whiskey is better, and absolutely, they were doing it by the 1740s for sure, but in tiny quantities. Commercially, 1823, they changed the legislation, and you don't have to pay tax on whiskey until it leaves the warehouse.
Right.
There's reasons to do that, stamp out smuggling, so the distillers can use surplus barley, so it doesn't go into the smuggling system.
Sure.
So it's all quite logical when you look into it. And then companies that start to be successful, who weren't farmers, that's another myth. This whole farmer using a bit of leftover barley may have happened sometimes, but rarely, and certainly when you start getting to the names that we recognise, they weren't farmers. You start to get whiskey being matured. Rum, you could buy 20-year-old rum for a long time before that. Rum was miles ahead as an industry in terms of aging of their spirits and technical understanding of how rum was distilled. Cognac was the same as well.
Really?
Yeah, miles ahead. And I actually find that a really interesting point in that rather than going with this mists of time analogy, and it's all developed up in the Highlands, and then slowly it graduated, and then finally they let the farmers start distilling, and then it took off. No. It was a mess before that. Violent world. Smuggling was brutal. People died. People were burnt alive in cottages. That we shouldn't really romanticize that too much. Then 1823, with a really firm hand, the government had a really big impact on the Scotch whisky industry. The Scotch whisky industry might not have happened. That's another thing to bear in mind. We always have this kind of perception that single malt would always rise to this iconic, or whiskey would always rise to this iconic status. That's not true either. It took a lot of turns where it might never have happened. But the key point is it happened late, and it happened hard, and it happened fast. There is an extraordinary explosion from like 1840, 1850 up to 1898.
Yeah.
That's a really narrow time frame.
And again,
this
may be a myth, but my understanding was always it was the crash of the cognac industry, the kind of vine disease in France that led in the 1860s that led to the rise of whiskey as a popular product.
That wasn't my work. I wanted to get onto it, and I'd always suspected the same. That's overblown, but they don't talk about it much.
Right.
Like, if I read a lot of this stuff, and you start to see what people are talking about, and it's not like woohoo, brandy's gone, and you look at the prices, and points brandy gets a bit more exciting. Expensive. But no, I don't see that. I think it was Nick Morgan who did a bit of work on that, maybe Ian Russell.
Yeah.
But that's exciting, because you give credit to these amazing people who built this industry. We didn't need that.
It wasn't a happy accident. It was something that genuinely, it was.
Yeah, there were lots of things coming together. One of them was phylloxera. That didn't do any harm, I'm sure.
Sure.
But it wasn't the reason. The reason was this incredible set of businesses linked to the empire. People don't like that much either, but it's true. You've got this network of distribution, linked to the empire, railways, movement of people to centres, huge population movement to cities. All these things started to come together, but people built amazing businesses really quickly. Yeah, the blenders actually, of course, they played a part, but in a generation and a bit. Like, amazing how quickly it happened from almost nothing. From almost nothing.
The other thing Ross said was, don't mention Fife as a region. Now, he said
Graham's planted the flag. He's banging the drum.
Yeah,
he says, "Why no make Fife a region?"
Well, Ross saying whatever you do, don't mention that is obviously like a bull to a red flag for me. So, right, Arthur, you've obviously got strong opinions on not letting the kingdom of Fife have its way in whiskey.
Why should it have a region? I'll ask the question back to you.
First, okay, right. I'm gonna.
Apart from there are some distilleries.
No, right. Okay, so what could you explain to me the fundamentals to be a recognised region in Scotland for whiskey? Is it not whiskey heritage, whiskey history, over three or more distilleries in the area, and what's that contributing to the history of whiskey, or something like that?
I'd rather look at the reasons why we have regions.
Okay.
And when that came about. When do you think that came about?
It was in the 90s. It was
I think it was actually legislated, possibly legislated 2009 or something like that. Yeah. So, but why did they put them in? I mean, apart from just saying there are places in Scotland and these distilleries are there, they put them in to provide a framework for people to understand whiskey, probably based on looking at the wine industry, where regionality does play a bigger part. That balance between it tastes like that because it comes like that, because it comes from there, i.e. the grapes are grown there, versus how the people make the thing to make that style. That balance is more tipped over to that way over in wine production. So they provided this framework because distilleries existed in those certain areas, and it's helpful to a degree, but you very quickly need to unlearn it as soon as you learn it.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, a Ben Romack is a peated Speyside whiskey. So anyone that says that, well, Islay or the west of Scotland is where you get peated whiskey from, etc., is bollocks, because anyone can do peated whiskey, just like King Lassie and Fife. The Inchdairney distillery are doing peated spirit. Fife peated whiskey, but I mean, is it now? I would say, from a marketing point of view, if I was to put it now, you're rummaging through the box that you brought with you. I would say, from a marketing point, it's marketing, right? It's the storytelling. It's being able to encourage people, and I would say that Campbelltown has 3 distilleries, has a huge history in whiskey. It was the capital of whiskey for a long time. With the amount of distilleries that were in Campbelltown at one point. But it has 3 distilleries. It has a history to it. But at the same time, Campbelltown probably benefits, number one, from having the distilleries there, fair enough. The distilleries in Campbelltown. But secondly, because it is a region, it probably gets more eyes on it because of that. Whereas actually, you could fly into Edinburgh Airport and within 40 minutes, half an hour, you could sample 3 comfortably very, very good distilleries within Fife. Fife has its own whiskey history in terms of the barley that was produced, that was grown, that was played a heavy part in the production. It had one of the biggest maltings in Scotland at one point as well. It's got more than 3 distilleries, which is what's required for the regionality framework. And also, when you look at the storage of whiskey in Fife, when you look at Diageo's storage facilities that you've got there, I would argue that probably at least a third of Scotch whisky is stored in Fife. Now that's I've made that number up, but I would, right? But I would say if
it's not a third, it's an awful lot.
When you look at Diageo has 2 major bonds in Fife. Okay, you've got the Diageo bond, and Gleeven, and you've
Like, I think what you're saying is go Fife, good for Fife. But all you're saying is Fife is a place, and there's some distilleries in it, and warehouses if you want to include that. And by all means, Fife, put the name on the bottle. Proudly say you're a Fife whiskey, and create your own block of collaborative marketing together. But it just doesn't mean anything to me. I think it's interesting that actually the Fife distilleries, Kingsbarns, Dartmill, leave Inchdairney aside because it doesn't fit your plan. Eden Mill. We don't know what's going to happen there next, but it's interesting that Kingsbarns and Dartmill both decided to make a Lowland style whiskey to fit in with that category, but they could have done anything.
And what about Lindors Abbey?
Lindors,
as Mike Jackson said, it's a homage it's a pilgrimage every whiskey enthusiast should make to where first distillation of recognised whiskey in Scotland happened.
Possibly. But no disrespect to Michael, he was a wonderful man. But and Lindors is a lovely place to visit. They've done a superb job with that as a visitor attraction. But it just doesn't mean anything to me. And the regions were kind of created in that way. Campbelltown didn't really make it up. I was rummaging around in my box because I had an old 1992 SMWS guide. Okay, how do you like the sound of this? They said there are 3 regions.
Okay.
Speyside, Lowland, and Island. I think it was Island. Yeah. Uh-huh. So Highland was a subdivision of Speyside. Then they said that Campbelltown whiskey was its own class. No idea what that meant.
Right.
They subdivided Highlands into 4 regions.
Okay.
East, West, North, or something like that. And Speyside was subdivided according to the rivers. The Lossy, the Fintor, and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, wow.
So this is kind of what I don't like about regionality. And that's a bad example of it. But it's showing that we were still working out what whiskey was. That's a kind of document that I really like, that shows you're thinking about that and thinking about the future, what it could be. But if you actually look at it, it's all kind of built on pretty shaky ground to begin with. And a document like that, for example, what I really don't like about the regionality thing is it puts too much accent on geography. And for the new people coming into the whiskey, they're thinking, oh, right, okay, so Five's got its own region. It must be something to do with the slightly drier summers they get over that way and all that type of stuff and da-da-da. Campbelltown tastes like it does because it tastes like it does because that's how they make whiskey. and
Yeah,
it's just
Fife,
misleading.
You couldn't say
Just
Fife has a
misleading.
distinctive flavour profile. Campbelltown, they say the Campbelltown funk. Isla, you could say association with it. But even
But you have to exceed.
exceptions.
Exceptions. And actually, really, I'll put it back to you. I think the East Nuke should declare independence from Fife because the rest of it's a dump.
Shout out, Dollar. I mean, that's it.
I guess my next. Well, I guess the kind of counterpoint to that whole argument is
no, the podcast is over.
No. Well, no.
As somebody that's not from that neck and that was from Fife, as a Kirkcaldy-born boy. That's it. We're finished. That's
no. To bring it to a kind of finality is are whiskey regions still relevant then? Is there still a good reason to have them, or is actually they're kind of pointless and Scotch whisky is Scotch whisky and that's it?
I think it would be bewildering if we took them away. But
Yeah.
my interest is I always want new people to appreciate this drink that I love and that's given me my career and all that stuff. And I do think there is a usefulness to it to just get some navigation somewhere along the lines. But we didn't organise a shop by regions at Royal Mile Whiskies, used to, but don't anymore. We just do it by alphabet like that way. And it'll be interesting to see where they are in 20, 30 years. But I think the last thing we should do now is subdivide by geography further. You're basically just giving otherwise you're basically just giving people a map of Scotland with the various.
It goes back to your point
Yeah.
about saying things like you know peated whiskey is a challenging whiskey to start with.
Yeah.
Because effectively, if you're suddenly saying, "Oh no, you're new to whiskey, you should probably try a nice sherried Speyside," which is or a lowland which is lighter, but actually it's nonsense because what we know is that you can mainland peat. I put it down in the newsletter earlier on that I've started to like peated whiskey, but actually mainland peated whiskey is more enjoyable. But there'll be people who would sit there and go, no, that's nonsense because the only place you can get peated whiskey or smoky whiskey is Isla, because that's what's the region. Anyway, we are fast approaching, otherwise this could end up being a two-parter. we are getting to the point, Arthur, where we ask our guest for your what three drams. These are three whiskies that have a sort of meaning, association or a story to them. So you've been in the industry for a long time. Only two jobs, right enough.
Three jobs.
Three jobs now, yes. You're the older version of Ross Barr, actually. Started so young, except he's worked his way through about 101 jobs in a shorter period of time. But three whiskies that have an association story or meaning to you.
Okay, cool. So I'm not very good with lists. Never have a favourite whiskey, all that type of stuff. And I kind of say, I could give you a top 10 favourite distilleries, but I never quite know what they are. But I gave it a little bit of thought, and I am going for something that doesn't quite exist yet, but I've tried a pre-sample of it. Does that count?
No, that counts, absolutely.
Right. Something that definitely exists, and we should be proud that it still exists. And then something that I only smelt and licked and didn't get to taste.
Oh, excellent! That's so
wow.
Sorry, I didn't mean to look you in the eyes.
No, that's quite all right.
No,
I was a bit worried. I was like,
sorry, I didn't mean to leave you out of that sexy moment.
There's no offence taken.
So
if you want to find out, join the Patreon.
Something that doesn't yet exist. I tried a pre-batch sample of Ardnamurchan at 10 years old, and it was great. I didn't know what it was because I happened to be staying in a place where someone who works at the distillery was also staying there. We'd heard a cottage. We got there late. He'd gone to bed. He'd left a bottle on the table. I had a dram before bed, and I was like, "Wow, that's a good one. That is a good one." And the next morning he told me it was like, I think a pre-batting version of Ardnamurchan.
Ardnamurchan 10.
Yeah, I don't know if it's coming out as a 10, but anyway, it was 10-year-old Ardnamurchan stock.
Right, so it's not, because Ardnamurchan have released a 10-year-old whiskey.
Yeah, but I'm nervous that I am saying something that might go on the plan. I don't know what it's going to turn into, but I suppose the point of it was a large-scale bottling. Now that Ardnamurchan's really come of age, I mean, it's been mature for a while now, and it was kind of like tasted like the future of Ardnamurchan. And look, I love everything those guys do. Worked with all these companies for a really long time. I've almost never done anything to piss me off, which is rare. I can be quite grumpy. I've liked so many of their bottlings. They're so drinkable, they're so accessible, the price is so fair, and it's just really good, wholesome in terms of the people, and like wholesome in the way they would describe it in the 19th century, whiskey that just makes you feel good. And this stuff, once it's got a bit of time now, it's getting minerality, it's got some fruit coming through, it's just getting better and better. And one of the things I've been most proud of at Royal Malt Whiskies is working with new distilleries, and that has been one of the most successful ones we work with such a great relationship all the way, coming out with some great ideas, and really collaborating. So that's definitely there, but it's really just a vote for like Ardnamurchan Merkin as that distillery. But that dram on Islay late at night or after a hard day's travel was fantastic.
So that's something that hasn't yet been released.
Yeah, and I think it's going to turn into something, but I'm not quite sure what.
And you're not quite sure when.
Yeah, I think I know what it is, but I don't want to.
Well, look, I mean,
don't want to
you
say
don't
too
have
much.
You don't have to preach too hard to us and our listeners for Ardnamurchan.
No.
It should technically be the Whiskey Stories podcast in association with Ardnamurchan. And if anyone in the marketing department at Adelphi Ardnamurchan are listening, sponsorship opportunities are still very much available. But
they pay for nothing.
well, it's just a cracking. What they produce is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah,
So
that's one.
Yeah.
Number two, I was out tasting with Mark Davidson. I think you mentioned him earlier on.
We did, yeah.
Yeah, and he did this Brora / Klein Leash tasting with the guy who'd written the book on Brora, and actually the whiskey, there was some real unicorn things in there. The really old Brora that was really young, the 72 Brora, both tasted like silage and wet hay in a good way, I think, but in a
good way.
Really dramatic, crazy whiskies. But actually, Klein Leash 14 they put in the lineup, blind.
Done it again, eh? The Klein Leash 14.
It's done it again.
That's
fantastic.
It's had a few mentions.
Fantastic. And I am not a basher of big companies, and I spoke about people pissing me off. Diageo have done that plenty of times over the years, but also done a lot of amazing, great things in the industry.
What
cracker.
Yeah, and what is it about Klein Leash 14 specifically? Because we've heard so many other people have mentioned it and talked about it. But what is it for you that
Well, it's the spirit, and that pineapple fruitiness that is there, and just this clarity of crowd-pleasing fruitiness, but with an intensity that is just so bright and Moorish and delicious. Absolutely great. I mean, it's the spirit. There was also an incredible 9-year-old Adelphi bottling that they had that was just fantastic as well. But I absolutely love it because I get texts all the time from people who, aunties, and I need to buy a bottle of whiskey quickly. What can you recommend? Something maybe in Waitrose or wherever. Yeah. And to be able to recommend something core and freely available, you can drink time after time, is so important.
Yeah.
So
there was a bottle of Klein. You brought a bottle recently.
Yeah, bottle on Amazon, £45.
Yeah. I had it in here on Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
I had it in here on Friday because I'll be honest, it's 3 people now. You're the 3rd person that's made this year.
Interesting.
That's put in their 3 drams. Ali Reynolds, Jake Adcook, and you're now yourself. And I want to try it and like it and really, really like it. And I wonder maybe if it's just been built up so much in my head that I put this dram in front of me and maybe I'm building up too much. I sat down on Friday and it was probably the most enjoyable dram of it I've had, where I just sat there and said, I'm just going to try and really understand what makes people, because there's a waxiness to it as well.
Oh yeah, there is.
Yeah. I should have.
The waxiness is the thing that we can.
Yeah. Right. Brilliant. And dram number 3.
So I can't say the name of the distillery.
Can you say the region?
It was a Campbelltown.
Mystery Campbelltown.
A mystery Campbelltown. But I was involved in this quite protracted private deal, of this case of really rare Campbelltown whiskey. It was a closed distillery.
Right.
From Campbelltown. So that dates are going back a long way. And
it's because the ones that are open have been open for a while.
Yeah, we use a specialist shipper to get this case of whiskey to the end buyer somewhere far away. And I got this phone call, it was a phone call when I was in Morocco, of all places, and there was a problem. And basically, they'd put this case of whiskey on one pallet, and then someone had knocked the case of whiskey over. It's a case of 6, and one of the bottles leaked. But you're talking about a lot of value per bottle, and you've gone from a fill level that's good to a fill level that's down here, and I can't in good faith just carry on with that shipment. And it was horrible and stressful, and there was a lot of compromise that had to happen in terms of the price. But I actually went down to this Muppets warehouse down in London, and there was all like, they were a specialist shipper of rare stuff, rare booze, and there was like this Cockney geezer, it was outskirts of London, and he was like, "Oh, you see where that case of Dom Perignon 1958 is?" And like, it was like just this ridiculously rare stuff all around, with people who just like didn't know what it was, all that kind of stuff. Hence, this utterly replaceable case of whiskey went over. So anyway, I had to inspect it, take some photos so we could sort out the compromise on price. But the bottle had leaked to the extent that the outside of it was wet, and I could run my finger up it and lick it and kind of and it was the character of those closed Campbelltown distilleries is an extremely interesting point, because the reason for the Campbelltown crash is debated about, and one of the reasons they say is that they weren't making particularly good whiskey. And certainly the prices that people would pay for Campbelltown whiskey were way lower than other places. So it had that reputation, that is real. But this stuff tastes good.
Really?
Smell tastes really good. Heavy sherry cask, like obviously a peated whiskey, quite briny, all that type of stuff. And it was just so tantalizing to try that. So what 3 drams? I suppose that's the one I would like to taste properly.
Wow. Brilliant, Arthur. Thank you so much.
That's the story.
Thank you.
I'm going to say one last myth. Campbelltown, crash, they're not special. Like, this is how the history that we're taught is what we end up with when the single malt whiskey explosion happened. The Campbelltown crash was like the last crash, you could say. But they're not special, and it wasn't unusual, and that happened other places and all the time. So immediately after 1823, the number of distilleries do that, and then they go down to that again. Perthshire had more distilleries than Campbelltown. That disappeared. Aberdeen had, not lots of distilleries, but all their distilleries disappeared. So it's multifactorial. I want to do more research on it, but this kind of big mystery of the Campbelltown crash. It happens it doesn't happen all the time, but it
wasn't exclusive as well.
But they've, there's been plenty of whiskey regions, but there's never been a whiskey kingdom like Fife, right? But anyway, Arthur, how can people find out about the Motley Spirit Agency? How can people keep up to date, keep up to speed with what you're doing? What's your socials? What people if they want to reach out?
I put stuff out on Instagram, and I suppose my worky updates are a bit more on LinkedIn. But honestly, that side of my business, you kind of have to work in the shadows, a bit like some Batman or something. It's the clients are it's all confidential and stuff. But brands want to talk to me, delighted to have initial chats. It doesn't cost you anything. But feel free to get in touch. But maybe for this audience, if you want to go a bit deeper into history and things like that, and hear from Dave Broom, who is just an amazing mind, and what a pleasure to work with him as a friend. Then Liquid Antiquarian on YouTube.
Brilliant.
You need to get on it. You need to get on it.
No, definitely. Listen, Arthur, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for everyone for staying tuned. Thank you so much for Arthur for coming in. Absolutely fascinating, brilliant, great whiskey stories. Thank you so much for coming on.
Absolute pleasure.
Keep an eye on the socials. Keep an eye on what's going on. We've sold out our whiskey big birthday bash hanging. Sell out Uno Mas.
Sold out.
Loads and loads of fun things going on. So if you have got tickets for that, it's going to be a great night. Look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much. All the very best, and thank you to Arthur once again for coming on. Slange of Cheers.
Slange.
Cheers.